Well, hello, good morning, and welcome to our latest Bristol Life event designed to help you in your business. Today, we're featuring the newly awards-winning Bevan Brittan, winner of last month's Bristol Property Awards in the legal category. Our congrats again to them for that. It's a special Bristol Life Business Surgery with Bevan Brittan. It'll be across a range of its disciplines, including, but not limited to, as lawyers sometimes do say, dispute resolution, perhaps such as the big insurance claim, story which broke recently, employment and HR, and corporate and commercial issues. We'll be hearing from Julian Hoskins, employment partner, Marty Burgess, corporate partner, and Wesley O'Brien, senior associate. What practical advice do you need now for your business right now? Perhaps a little bit about commercial property and premises, how your contracts should change in the light of this pandemic. That's quite a key area. How to navigate disputes, perhaps including insurance, employment rights and obligations and processes. What has changed and what may? How does the whole concept of no jab, no job play out? How might it play out? Who knows? Brexit, how that has impacted businesses. And what are we all doing, and what should you be preparing now for the Great Reset of 2021, getting your house, your legal house as it were, in order? Please do ask any questions and we will seek useful perspectives for you. Send your questions using the Q&A button below that you'll see and ask anonymously or be named as you like. Do name your company and your question if possible. Note, of course, that this business surgery is being recorded and will be on our Bristol Life YouTube channel this afternoon. You'll find all our sessions there, actually. Many helpful, we hope, but all a chronicle of these continuingly weird times. Before we get going, here's some news from Bristol Life itself about some of the things that we're doing. We've got some new business surgeries coming, one on April 14th with DataSharp Integrated Communications, followed by the following week with Close Brothers Property Finance, April 21st. These business surgeries are bespoke deep dive sessions showcasing companies' expertise from any sector through discussion. Please do talk to us about how you might be involved. We can all do with advice, and probably we would all much like new business. And by the way, there's also a special Bristol Life Business Club about business services on March 16th. On the awards front, I'd like to talk about some initiatives which we're doing. Our next one is in Bath. Yes, I know that's not quite Bristol, but it's pretty close. Our Bath Property Symposium and Awards will be held on March 12th. It's a week this Friday, not far away. It's got networking, live, high quality, deep professional analysis by our keynote speaker, who we specially commissioned, Chris Druce of Knight Frank, various trends, then the awards, all details on the site. Bristol Property Awards, look out for the review in Bristol Life of all our lovely winners, such as, I'll say it again, Bevan Brittan, on March 26th, and still time to be involved in that. And then the real life version, and like you, we cannot wait for that. That'll be November 12th, and we can all get back together in real life again. Bristol Life Awards, we've announced we'll be running live on 16th of September. If you missed that launch event where we ran through the details, it's the recording is available on our Bristol Life Awards YouTube channel. And sponsors, it's great how many sponsors have come on board. I won't run through the full roster, but we really do appreciate the support which we've had from multiple companies. The nominations are open now and will close in a few weeks' time. We'll give you good notice via all the channels. And of course, with the surge in interest that has been in the awards this year, it's quite clear this desire to get together again. We've decided that tickets will go on sale early from next week. So please look out for the announcements around that. As ever, thank you for your support for Bristol Life. It's clear that many companies are gearing up now for those better times ahead for us all. And on that front, by the way, do look out for that special commemorative 300th issue of Bristol Life published at the end of May. Now, those of you who are familiar with our oeuvre, for want of a better expression, will spot the word crumbs. First time we've mentioned crumbs in a little while. It's our own award-winning foodie brand. And then we've got some news about this. We'll be running a virtual conference for the hospitality sector on April 19th as part of this Crumbs brand. It's called the Crumbs Takeaway in the sense of what you gain from a conference, obviously. It'll feature national level keynotes, panel sessions, practical insights, and some genuinely heartwarming tales of the good that people do, how hospitality businesses have responded magnificently to support others during the pandemic. If you're in hospitality, please do join. And if you supply the sector and want to raise your profile, let's talk. This whole sector is quite clear as being regalvanized, and we want to play our part and help and promote the smart practices. Right, okay, enough all of that. Let's do this. Come on to our business surgery. Please do ask your questions, and we've had a few already. I'll come on to shortly. Anonymous if you wish, but otherwise give me your name if you wish to join. Let's bring forward our trio of speakers from Bevan Brittan. As they're stepping forward, a quick bit of information on each. Julian Hoskins, employment partner, is an employment lawyer advising employers on all aspects of employment and discrimination law, including boardroom disputes, large-scale reorganisation redundancies, injunction proceedings following strike ballots. Gosh, strikes, I guess they still happen. Senior exec terminations, sounds terrible. Discrimination and whistleblowing claims. Marty Burgess, a familiar face, I'm sure, to many, corporate and finance partner, specialising in company sales and purchases, corporate restructures, and the preparation of corporate contracts, shareholder agreements, partnership agreements, and so on. And Wesley O'Brien, senior associate, dispute resolution lawyer, specialising in reputation management claims, including defamation, harassment, privacy claims, and intellectual property disputes, including trademark, copyright, and design right infringement claims. Welcome to you all. I'm going to begin with an incredibly hard, difficult question for you to show how much you're going to get a grilling today. How good did it feel to win that Bristol Property Awards gong last month? Decent way to start the year?
Yeah, it's a great way to start the year, Greg. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Bevan Brittan, like other companies, but Bevan Brittan is very keen to foreground its expertise. And I guess that sense of, not just with our awards, but with others, of course, as well, external validation of what teams are doing is always positive. I'd imagine there's a little bit of whooping, and you'll have that gong in your reception when you're all back in work at some point shortly.
Yeah, it's very important. I think in these days of pandemic and sort of internal morale, if I can put it that way, people working from home probably had enough of it. It is great. It lifts the spirit. So it's really important internally as well as externally.
Good. Well, congrats again to you for that. I want to come on to business planning, and we're all everyone in business is thinking anew about how we are shaping our business and preparing it and so on. We can begin to see the hints of these the early stages of the end of these times. Don't want to be too optimistic about it. But businesses are gearing up, getting match fit. What would you advise in terms of contracts and reviewing your business from a legal perspective as we enter this new changed world?
I think I'll feel this one. I think it's obviously important to look to see how your contracts are dealing with these issues around Brexit and COVID-related disruption, because lots of the contracts you've entered into before March last year obviously won't have covered those scenarios, or indeed, if it did attempt to cover Brexit, it would have been a very high level because it wasn't clear what the exit would look like at the end of the transition period. So you really need to take a very close look at those provisions in the contract and make sure that you're covered for any future possible disruption that may be caused by those issues, and to deal obviously with the new normal and the new way you're doing business.
And Wes, what does that mean in practice? Perhaps give an example of where companies have looked anew at their contracts and realised that they do need to make changes. Is that something you've been experiencing that clients are concerned about?
Yeah, we have seen that. Yes, obviously people have been through 12 months of this experience now. If you're talking specifically about COVID, so the way in which the supply contracts are provided, the way in which the payment obligations are set up may not be exactly fit for purpose now that things have had to be rearranged to deal with the COVID disruption. So yeah, we have seen a lot of people renegotiating those sorts of terms, and actually the kind of provisions they got in the contract around force majeure has helped them get together to discuss those things, and has actually come to, it's a positive outcome for both parties in most cases. We've seen some parties look to use it as an opportunity to terminate their contracts early and exit, because sometimes the contract has allowed them to do that, or at least to have the discussion with the other party. But on the whole, we've seen parties working collaboratively and positively with each other to achieve a good outcome for both parties and set themselves up well for when we get out of this.
If you take a sort of stand back point, are you slightly surprised that given how profoundly business owners, senior execs have been thinking about their business and every single aspect of all of us, Media Clash, all other businesses, working from home, communication, different business offerings, budgeting, I mean, just the whole thing, much has changed. Opening hours, e-commerce, I mean, God knows what. Are you surprised that companies are not actually looking at the bedrock of their businesses yet more, the contracts in which they operate and the terms of trade in which they work from?
I am surprised. Yeah, some of them are doing that, but I think at the moment a lot of people are just trying to get through this. So if it means that they are just making a few tweaks here or there in the short term, and then perhaps agreeing to have a more serious look at the overarching arrangements at the end of it when we get through this, then that's what is sort of happening on the ground, I think. But yeah, I am surprised that some people haven't sort of looked at the bedrock of the business and see whether they could do things differently. I think at the moment, a lot of people are just trying to get through this, and if it means small tweaks here and there for the time being and some temporary arrangements and some workarounds, and that's what's happening.
So maybe given the roadmap last Monday, already seems ages ago, particularly the Chancellor's statement and spring budget on Wednesday, maybe it's at that point. And I'm thinking from Bevan Brittan's point of view as well, the idea of having a diagnostic set to review with businesses, your clients. I suspect many businesses would find that welcome as a health check they're operating.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, I do think a few businesses are now looking at that. I've had a few conversations in the last 2 weeks where people are looking, particularly those in the hospitality sector, where they're gearing up for being opening.
Yeah, and related to that, again at a reasonably top level, what do you think key learnings are for businesses in the last 10 months or so from a legal perspective? What should they be doing differently now?
Feel that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think businesses are looking at being able to move quickly. I think people have had to learn that on their feet, and they've had to learn to be prepared for things like not being paid, not having any income. And so, yeah, people I think have learned the word pivot. And so I think that also has an impact on their legal documentation.
Yeah. Well, of course, one of the areas where, and I note your hesitation before the word pivot. I think we're all ever slightly thinking, oh gosh, is it really that? But we're all having to change what we do. One of the most profound areas is in employment. So I'd like to come on to Julian on this in terms of the furlough scheme. Mm-hmm. I think there's pretty much consensus that the Chancellor, at least in some way, is going to extend, possibly taper, come Wednesday. But Julian, from your point of view, what have been the key issues to date for businesses, and where do you see the sort of tension points going forwards between employers and employees, given the furlough scheme extension and provisions?
Well, I think the two, whether or not it's extended, and I agree, I think it's very likely to be extended. But two issues here in terms of the scheme itself is one, sort of being mindful of the purpose of the scheme, which is to allow you to maintain your workforce and not make people redundant. But in doing so, now is the time to take stock in terms of the size of your workforce and decide whether actually at the end of all of this, whether that's going to be practicable. And the reason I say that is that there's more and more noise around now that the government or HMRC rather may at some stage in the future look back and say, look, at the time that you were claiming that grant, were you genuinely thinking that you were going to maintain your workforce at its current level? And where that would happen is if immediately at the end of furlough you suddenly start making a load of redundancies. So there's a timing issue. So, if you're giving advice to employees at the moment, presuming furlough is going to be extended, I think rather than automatically rolling into it, now is the time to actually plan for the future insofar as you can and say, what is the level of manpower we're going to be needing in 4 or 5 months' time?
I want to explore that point because you've given a slightly different perspective, one which gives us all employers, I'm sure, pause for thought. The critique of the furlough scheme is only this, that it creates a cliff edge and at the end of that cliff edge, there will be redundancies. It's delaying redundancy. But as I understood what you said, and I may not have quite got the nuancing right, if the point at the end of the furlough means mass redundancies, there could be queries from HMRC about those redundancies. Surely that's just normal course of business. If you can't afford to pay people via the furlough scheme, it's redundancy time potentially.
Well, it is. So the question, so far as HMRC is concerned, is at the stage that you were claiming a grant, whether that be in January, February, March time, did you already know, could you not already foresee that you weren't going to be able to maintain your workforce? Because that is the purpose. That's the purpose. It always was the purpose. Nothing's changed there, but I think it's come into slightly sharper focused. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be as simple as running with the furlough scheme, taking the money and then suddenly making redundancies. I think there needs to be some kind of audit trail of a thought process. Now, clearly that's going to happen with a lot of businesses. But it's just, when you're applying for the grant, it's just having the right thought process, i.e. we're doing this because we genuinely believe we can maintain our workforce at the end of all of this.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely sure that the vast majority of businesses are of course doing it for entirely the right reasons. They want to support their teams, they're hoping to be able to get to a point at which they can then trade, and they're hoping to have virtually all of their team trading at that point.
Yeah.
Your advice is quite clear. Have some sort of audit trail, in other words, paper trail perhaps of your different companies' thinking processes at different times.
Yeah, absolutely right. And HMRC aren't going to be draconian about this. And obviously it's not an exact science. But I think if they can point to the fact that you knew in February, March time, that come June, and let's just presume it's going to be extended for that type of period, that redundancies were inevitable. If there was anything in a board minute or something saying that, then that wouldn't look good.
Yeah. Well, also doesn't look good, or at least could be problematic, is this whole rising issue around no jab, no job.
Yeah.
It's a blunt way of saying that the probability that companies, certain companies will seek to insist their employees are coronavirus vaccinated. What's your take on both, first of all, the legality of that, and then how companies and employees may try to navigate through it in the coming months?
Well, I think the starting point is that everybody in this country has a right to refuse medical intervention, which is partly why the government aren't able to and don't sort of mandate that everyone has to have a jab. They can very, very strongly, as they are, recommend it, as you do as an employer. Now, that's a slightly different question as to whether an employer can say, in order for you to work for us or continue working for us, we require you to have a jab. And whether that is reasonable is also going to depend on the sector in which you work. So that, for example, it might be more of a reasonable insistence in social care or in the healthcare sector than it is for a firm of accountants who could have people working from home. So it is going to depend on what's reasonable. So the starting point is, in your particular sector or in business, you want to do a risk assessment. If you are going to mandate that people have the jab, you're going to need to consult with them about that, particularly those who refuse to have the jab, and find out why they're refusing. If they're refusing for, or for example, if someone's on maternity, is pregnant, you're not going to be able to mandate that they have the jab. If someone has a disability, that might be, they might have a claim for discrimination. And then there are grey areas on discrimination where people may have claims. I've heard, for example, veganism, which is a belief. If you insist on a vegan having the jab, they may refuse to do so on the basis of how it was tested in the first place with animals, etc. And it might be unreasonable to insist on them having the jab. So as a thought process, you need to consult with your employees. You really need to think of what else you can do. So maybe some people can work at home, some people can work at the workplace. But ultimately, if you then decide it's business critical, perhaps because their workmates are insistent on it or anything else, you then have to go to the next stage, which is send them home without pay or dismiss them. Now, would that dismissal be reasonable? I don't know. And this is the problem. We're not going to know until there's case law on this, which, to be honest, will be too late. But providing you've done the risk assessment, gone through the consultation process, and decide that you don't have any realistic alternative, and that decision is going to be scrutinized, bearing in mind your size and administrative resources as a business decision rather than what someone else would do and whether it's right or wrong. But if you follow those processes, there's a very good chance that such a dismissal will be fair. But I think you're going to have to take advice on the situation with each individual as and when it arises.
So I mean, ultimately, each case is bespoke, but there's a framework of law, of course.
Yes.
Take a specific to illustrate the point. Barchester, one of the biggest care home providers in the country, at least 2 weeks ago, whether or not they've resiled from this, I don't know. They said they required all of their workers to be vaccinated. If you were advising, not literally Barchester, but anyone in the care sector who said for self-evident reasons, we require vaccination, would you advise them to proceed down that line or not?
Well, I think I know those in that sector have been doing that, and they are at one extreme, as it were. But in terms of the people they're looking after and people coming in other homes, etc., you can see why that's necessary. But Barchester would still have to go through the same process. For example, is there someone who's on the front line who temporarily could do administrative duties, which they could perhaps do from home or from elsewhere? So they really ought to be going through that process rather than just saying all our workforce must have it.
What about in 2 other cases? And by all means, I know it's not your direct area of expertise, Marty and Wes, but these are into issues of sort of morality and navigation of disputes and so on, essentially. 2 other areas. One would be hospitality, where it will entirely suit the hospitality company to be able to communicate to its potential customers, you're safe coming to our restaurant or bar because all our staff have been vaccinated.
Yeah.
How would that work for them? And the second question is, what about if a team of, 10, 9 of them have been vaccinated and 1 refuses, and the other are then saying, you have to take it. It's from the team up rather than the company down. How do you navigate? How do you advise companies and individuals to navigate those 2 scenarios?
I think in terms of the second scenario, if you've got 9 people who signed up for it, that tends to suggest that you followed a good sort of consultation information procedure in order to get there. And the fact that 9 of them are going to be distressed about this and perhaps not come to work themselves, for example, is something else to throw into the pot in terms of the reasonableness of the decision to tell the other one has got to be at home without pay for that duration, or perhaps even dismiss. So it's the same advice as we've just gone through, but it makes your case slightly stronger. Yeah. And sorry, what was the first one again? The first question.
The first one was about hospitality, that it suits from a communication point of view to say all of our team have been vaccinated.
Well, I think, and again, that's something else to throw into the pot. Reputational management and sort of general business considerations. And I think in hospitality, which is face to face, let's face it, it has to be. That's all part of it, and that's what we want to get back to. Again, I think that's a strong suit in your favour. But one caveat in answer to both those questions, which is an absolute must, is that if there are people who can say this discriminates against me on genuine grounds, for example, because they have some disability. Jab phobias, genuine jab phobias, and it's a big thing. I didn't realise that. Apparently about 15% of the country have genuine jab phobias. You'd have to look at all of those things and treat those people differently.
It's perfectly understandable why someone in the hospitality sector of business would want to give out the message that its staff have been fully vaccinated. And obviously that's a very positive message, a very clear message, and reputationally it looks good for them. But yeah, the kind of employment law minefield that Julian's outlining is really the main consideration behind that. I mean, reputationally, do you want to be then seen to be in dispute with a number of your employees because you've said they can't work if they don't have the vaccine? It's a difficult one to balance that.
It is, and it's difficult to balance, but government is not going to mandate this. It's leave it, as you say, Julian, to some case law, some precedent being established. And in the meantime, it's a fraught, grey, complicated area at the margin for many people and for many businesses. And I guess the overall advice is always tread carefully, be reasonable, and seek legal advice.
And speak to people, as in your employees, or all the way along. So bring people with you, as long as you're seen to have done that, that should help with any potential claims in the future.
This business surgery won't be wholly about the grim stuff, but there is another grim area which you've touched on, which is the potential for redundancies. This observation that furlough is delaying redundancies is a pretty unpleasant term of zombie companies existing only on government grants and so on. Are you experiencing more companies talking to you about potential restructurings and redundancies?
Yes, for sure. They are. I mean, as things stand, furlough ends at the end of April, and therefore people have known that for some time. In fact, it was the end of March, and therefore have been talking about that. One thing that's been different now, as to 9 months ago, people have also been speaking to me about this question of what are HMRC going to do, which I don't know, but in terms of the purpose of the grant, i.e. to maintain the workforce. So that's something that nobody really raised last April, May, June, but they are now sort of alive to.
As a piece of practical advice, given the uncertainties, we all believe that fundamentally this year will develop more strongly, but there are uncertainties. Would you advise, or are you seeing more fixed term contracts as opposed to open contracts, that employment, like so much else, is more contingent these days?
I don't think I have seen that as yet, but I can see that coming down the line. Yeah.
And Marty, from a sort of corporate point of view, is there more focus on different packages, different approaches that are more contingent because of these times, that people are reviewing how they remunerate the more senior people, how they're restructuring their companies in anticipation of more complicated times ahead?
I think so. People are definitely looking at their businesses to see which bits are profitable now and which bits will be profitable going forward, and potentially hiving off some of it or discontinuing with some services, just because the world has changed and they've got to plan for a future where perhaps a certain part of their business won't continue. So we've had a lot of conversations with clients recently about restructuring, and particularly about moving bits of their business around in order to make sure they shore up the bits which are doing okay.
Could you give an example of that? Obviously not chapter and verse, but some idea when you say moving elements around. What's the type of thinking which some business owners are?
Well, I mean, in the hospitality sector, people that their businesses have changed. They are a lot of businesses just won't have the same. It won't be the same operation going forward because of the pandemic has meant to change, which was probably coming anyway. So we're moving into a cashless society, and that was always coming, but that's happened a lot faster. So perhaps you've got a business where they would sell tickets and have cash coming in, or sell drinks and have cash coming in. They don't. So that means that certain parts of their business aren't necessary. So they're thinking about how to restructure to be prepared for the way things will be.
And by the way, just a quick flag again about our Crumbs conference. It seems to me there's so many different aspects of how hospitality businesses are, or at least will be trading. I think that'll be a very interesting event. Let's talk about what the pandemic has meant in terms of how people think about their business destiny. In other words, have some people thought differently about their companies and they think now is the time for exit? Are you seeing more inquiries in that vein? And then on the sort of negative side, are you seeing more potential distressed assets, people having to get out from under?
Yeah, I haven't had a flood of work around distressed assets, but I've definitely had more inquiries from people who've taken a stock and are thinking maybe they were planning to sell in 10 years, but they're thinking about it now because they've just reevaluated life. And also people are looking at how do they transfer their business to their staff and do it in a way which is easy for the staff and easier for the staff and good for them. They get their return. So I've been working on a project at the moment where the owner wants to transfer the business to his team, but wants to do it in a way that they're not under a lot of pressure. So I think there's been a lot of that where people have thought, there's more important things going on, just continuing to grow a business. It's to work well with your team.
It sounds like one of those logic puzzles where you've got to get everyone across on a raft to another island. So if you start from a business owner with assets and a management team with no finance, i.e. they can't buy those shares, what sort of deal structures might work in that situation? The owner wants to sort of reduce time, step back, team to take it over. How can that work? They haven't got the money?
Well, gradually. So you use the growth of the business year on year and the profits made are used to help the employees buy the owner out. That's one solution we've been looking at. Another one where you just have to take the potential owners have to look at the different ways they can finance, maybe raising some of the money themselves from their own personal funds, but also borrowing money in, and then the vendor being willing to support the sale. So they've got to somehow either lend money to their management team or just do it over a long period of time.
Oh. Are you seeing more inventive deals and deal structures coming to market that this time is sort of, it's changed so much? The tectonic plates have sort of shifted across areas. Has that also applied to deal structures?
It doesn't seem like there's not a lack of investors out there willing to fund deals. So I think there's not. It feels different from 2008, where there was a lack of money. So it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel the same. I think there is money available if you want to fund a deal. It's really a case of how much you're prepared to put at risk to do the deal.
And in terms of because of this, I keep saying these complicated times in which we've been in, have there been inhibitors to deal making? For example, the whole concept of working from home doesn't really fit with site visits and kicking the tires and getting a feel for a company's culture. People are atomized to their kitchen tables and bedrooms. Has that been an inhibitor?
Well, for us, doing due diligence has become harder because you just the things you usually typically do, including site visits, you haven't been able to. So it means that the asking for information process has taken longer.
Yeah, I mean, like so much of business in these times, everything is taking a bit longer. I wonder if there's any other impacts from the COVID effect on corporate restructures that has changed, not just the physical nature of due diligence. Anything that materially changed? I mean, for example, are deals more contingent? They're more based on earnouts ever than previously?
We've seen a lot more with deferred consideration. So this is where the seller gets a portion of the money up front and the rest over time, because you're relying on, to some extent, the seller's information about a business as it was in 2019 and ruling out 2020. So you're saying that 2021 or 2022 will be back to somewhere closer than 2019. So it has become a lot more deferred consideration based around the seller's kind of forecast. So if you don't hit those targets, then the price may get reduced, or there'll be some further delay. So that's definitely we haven't done any deal in the last sort of 10 months where anyone's been paid everything up front. It's all been a lot of deferred consideration, and one of them quite a long period of time as well.
I mean, as a general trend, that was in my view would be that was in place prior, but it's been accelerated by COVID. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that. And we've got a client who's been working. He's had an acquisition fund to buy 4 or 5 businesses since the back end of 2019, and we've got to 2021, and he's not bought anything because he's worried about paying over the odds, and the sellers don't want to sell it below value. So we've looked at 4 or 5 deals for him. Nothing's happened because you just can't get the sellers and the buyers to meet and that I think has been an issue. Deals have taken longer to come through to get to the point where everyone's happy with all aspects of it.
By the way, for anyone watching this, obviously bear in mind that the legal companies, Bevan Brittan in this case, are great sources of information about potential buyers. They've got people coming from that side wanting to buy or interested in buying, and you may be sell, so you never know what's out there. But tell me about this, about that deferred consideration, what I've called the sort of earn out and so on. What has happened to deals which are struck in 2017, 18, 19, which were based on FY20 or 21's financial performance, which when struck were perfectly reasonable, but actually have been utterly terrible? Have some of those deals been revisited, or people say, you know what, tough, that was the deal, and we're paying threepence for it if you didn't perform in that year?
So I've moved firms in between that, so I haven't got any deals I'm working on at the moment where I'm kind of unpicking it. We've got one where we've got a bit of unpicking because the buyer has decided to withhold because he doesn't believe certain targets that have been met. So we're just having that argument now, and about to think about instructing counsel, because there's a mechanism in there where they can agree how much should be. I think we've all agreed that there should be some reduction, but we're not agreeing with the amount. So we're going to take it to counsel. So, but I haven't got a raft of those because I'm not in the same firm. But I imagine that there is this going on.
Well, that takes us into dispute resolution, which we'll be coming to shortly with Wes. But just a couple more points around the corporate side. And it's a somewhat old-fashioned expression which still exists. Is key man insurance, and apologies, we're all labouring under that term still. Is key man insurance, has that been affected by the pandemic? That suddenly those corporate health support packages have become somewhat changed by the pandemic?
I haven't seen anything like that. I've seen where insurance has really come into play. It's been around the business interruption insurance. Some things have gone up, and then particularly around the directors' indemnity insurance. That's something which people seem to want to have. More and more directors seem to want that, had to have that in place, because they're looking at their own personal responsibility within companies. But no, I haven't personally seen a huge sort of, I don't know, uptick in issues around key man insurance. I don't know if Wes has at all.
Wes, is this a burning topic for you, or should I just forget that question?
No, it's not a burning topic for me.
All right. Actually, sorry, one last for Marty. Is it, as a stand-back point, do you think this is a better time to be buying because the pressure on shareholders to extract value or whatever, than to sell because of depressed trading and it's hard to realise the value? Which would you?
It depends why you're selling. I mean, often people are selling because they've got no choice. The situation's distressed, or they're selling because someone's made an offer they can't refuse, or they're selling because they've made a lifestyle choice. And I don't think that's going to. I mean, if you want to get out because you've taken stock of the year, I don't think that's changed. I think it's all very personal why you decide to sell. But from a buyer's perspective, if you've got cash in the bank to buy, then yeah, you could possibly pick up a bargain right now, because for various reasons somebody might need to sell. And so, yeah, I think it feels slightly like a buyer's market, but then sellers do have agency in this, and they can choose to hang on and continue until they get a price. So, yeah.
Well, there's certainly an awful lot of capital washing around in the system, and capital ultimately has to find a home, and maybe that will prompt, when there's slightly less uncertainty, maybe that will trigger
Yeah, that's what feels very different this time, and I don't know how long that will continue. It doesn't seem as if there's a lack of investors and lenders out there at the moment. It feels like if you've got the right proposition in front of you, then you could borrow money to buy the asset or buy the company.
Thanks. Let's come on to dispute resolution. There's multiple different iterations of this, whether it's Brexit related or COVID related. But Wes, are companies, in your experience, being any more pragmatic, or are disputers gonna dispute regardless?
There's a good question. I think on the whole, parties are being more pragmatic. So we've seen parties trying to work through these issues, as I mentioned at the start of the session, working collaboratively together. There are a few who have seen it as an opportunity to wriggle out of their obligations or to renegotiate the terms. And sometimes the contract, of course, allows you to do that. Depends what the force majeure provision or similar says. But I can think of one example where we were acting for, and we still are acting for, the owners of a theatre. So this is in entertainment sector, and under various stages during the previous lockdowns, there was always a possibility that it might reopen, but there would need to be 50% or 30% of the seating full capacity, so not a full capacity. And so they were looking really for an opportunity to exit, because they were paying a lot of money to another company who was providing the operation and management of the service, and it was quite a lot of money as well. So they were looking to renegotiate, and I think now that we've got this exit roadmap and the possibility that come June that theatre, for example, may be able to run at full capacity, things will have changed again. So that I think these conversations are moving all of the time, and people are trying to just keep up with what the government rules and restrictions are, and what will happen when we all come out of this. But on the whole, to answer your question, we have seen people collaborating, and indeed, if you're contracting with any public body, then there have been plenty of government guidance, which is expressed as guidance, but it's essentially a bit more than guidance. It's telling you what you need to do, and that has always been the tone of that has always been you need to try and collaborate and work through work through this together, so that the contract stays alive.
You mentioned an avowedly sort of non-legal phrase about companies trying to wriggle out of their obligations. Can I ask on a personal point? Do you ever find yourself a little bit conflicted where someone is trying to wriggle out and they're sort of taking advantage of the situation? Do you ever say or feel the need to say, you know what, this isn't right, stick with it?
Well, we can only advise them on what they're entitled to do under the contract, and if the contract does entitle them to do that, to wriggle out of obligations in a valid and in a legal way, then that's what the contract says. I mean, it's the motives behind it are essentially for them, and there are all sorts of different drivers as to why they might want to do that. But ultimately, they've signed a contract, and it's a commercial agreement between two commercial entities, so it is what it is, the contract. It's more difficult where they are trying to obviously try and find a way to achieve that when the contract doesn't allow them to do that, and then you have to fall back on things like frustration, which is a common law doctrine, which is almost impossible to succeed on, because it relies on the contract becoming impossible to perform. And of course, even with all these very heavy restrictions, depends of course what the obligations are in the contract, with all the restrictions and lockdowns and things, there's often a way that at least some of the obligations in the contract can be performed in some way, in one way or another, even if it's via an alternative method. So frustration is a very difficult argument to run, but we have had some clients trying to run that, and our advice has been, well, you're very unlikely to succeed on it. It's up to you if you want to try it, but we don't recommend it. Yeah. That type of thing.
Well, that's good. A very good textbook dead bat approach to the question. I think that's ultimately the people's motivation is entirely separate from what is permissible under law or under best practice, and that's what. And you will advise, of course, on what the limits of that might be. Let's come on to that point about frustration, this legal term which people may be less aware of now, but is likely to become a more significant element in the months to come. Can you explain what frustration of contract means in practice? Perhaps give an example of where it has worked.
It's hard to find an example because it doesn't work in most cases in normal commercial contracts. Most of a frustration is where there is a supervening event which was not anticipated by the parties, and where there is no allocation of risk whatsoever in the contract about that particular event, which makes performance of the contract impossible. So both parties can't continue to perform it, and it automatically then terminates. Most of the case law is about is around shipping, and it's mostly where the cargo is being destroyed, so a party cannot transport it because the cargo doesn't exist. Those are the sorts of frustrating events that the courts have upheld. Now, it's more, as I say, it's much more difficult to do that in a normal commercial arrangement, because there'll be all sorts of different obligations for which payment's required for them, and COVID has been very disruptive, of course, but there are some obligations in the contract that would be capable of being continued to be performed with no problems whatsoever, and there are others which can still be performed just in some alternative way. So frustrations is a very difficult argument to run, and as I say, when clients have looked at that, and we had a lot of these inquiries, as you can imagine, at the very beginning of the pandemic about 12 months ago, it just wasn't a runner, those sorts of arguments. You end up looking at what the contract says, and of course your contract probably does contain some provisions that will help you navigate a way through it, and you may have already looked at this over the past 12 months, and those are, it's either a force majeure clause or something similar to it. It could be buried within a business interruption or business continuity provision, but it might be there somewhere.
Let's come on to force majeure. If you could define it for us, and I know its applicability may of course be very specific in certain cases, but define it for us in the context, one, of the pandemic, but two, in terms of Brexit. Could either, or aspects of either, constitute force majeure?
Yes, they could. So the first point to note is that force majeure is not a universally understood term in English law. So it is not a principle like frustration, which just exists in common law. Force majeure is just a way of describing some express provisions in the contract that the parties have agreed how they will deal with certain issues arising that perhaps they can't control. So, as I say, it's either called a force majeure clause, or there is some wording buried in business continuity or change of law provisions, or other sorts of risk allocation provisions in the contract. It doesn't need to be called force majeure, and it will set out sometimes very precisely what the parties can and can't do if there is an event of force majeure. Now, Brexit, of course, may have been one, because there may have been some quite big disruption caused by the end of their transition period. If your contract was entered into after 2016, though, when the referendum was, I mean, you might argue, one party might argue that the disruption was foreseeable, so that the clause doesn't necessarily cover it. But you may be able to argue that it does. So with COVID, almost certainly, you wouldn't have foreseen it before March last year. So if your contract was older than March, then you'll have a good chance of arguing that it's covered. And then you get into detailed arguments about whether the specific wording covers a pandemic. And then once you get over that hurdle, you need to look at actually what the contract says the parties can do. Some of them just say performance is suspended for 3 months, or a period of time to be agreed between the parties for how long the disruption continues, and then everything goes back to normal. Or some say that, and then it says the parties need to meet to renegotiate certain terms, and then some go on to say if it's still continuing after a certain period, the contract can be terminated, which obviously might be what one party wants to do and the other one doesn't. So then that's a bit difficult, and it comes back to really what your intentions are, because Brexit-related disruption or COVID-related disruption may give you an opportunity to achieve something that you were trying to achieve before but couldn't. So do you want the contract to continue? Is it a bad deal for you? Do you want to try and get out of it? Or do you want to renegotiate some of the terms, because we're now living in a different, we're now delivering services in a completely different way? And all these things can, of course, be negotiated by agreement.
Talking of different services, clearly there's been a lot of publicity recently about the business interruption insurance policy, the new case established. I know the answer is always going to be, it all depends. It depends on the company, it depends on the insurance policy and so on. But talk us through the broad pieces of advice about companies right now who know their business was disrupted, who have an insurance policy, but are trying to sort of marry one to t'other to get benefit.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, this is a hot topic, obviously, at the moment, following that Supreme Court decision, which you'll probably all know the result of. But it was a very bad result for the insurers, a very bad result. It didn't just lose on the business interruption insurance policies and the particular wording the court was looking at, but they lost on a whole range of other points that they've relied on for years in relation to all sorts of different insurance claims and their ability to bat them away. So it's a terrible result for them. But there's a massive inequality of bargaining position here, and I think there's a big gap in expectations, because the Supreme Court said at the end of it, well, we hope this test case will help prompt settlement, facilitate prompt settlement of lots of claims. The FCA and the press have been saying it's a victory for the insureds and everything's going to be fine type thing. But the insurers are not going to roll over on this one, because reputationally the damage is done to them. It was a terrible result. It was terrible for them to appeal it, and then the result has been very bad for them. And they'll try and still come up with all sorts of other arguments about why they can avoid paying out for business interruption because of cover limits and deducting furlough payments, knocking off government grants. Or they'll find all sorts of other ways of sort of wriggling out of their obligations. And I think even Hiscox are saying they're only going to pay out on 1/3 of claims. So there is a big expectation gap. So I think the fight is not finished yet. If you've got BII cover and it appears to cover the scenario where your business has been disrupted because of COVID, then it's not going to be as straightforward as making a claim and getting a payout.
So it appears, under American law, there's a much greater concentration on class actions where companies, individuals band together. Some aspects of that in the UK. What would you advise Bristol businesses watching this? Should they, go out, and there'll be some quite small businesses, no doubt, but go out on their own, make their case, take legal advice, run their course, or B, band together in some form of class action?
Well, in a way, the Supreme Court decision was a sort of class action in its own right. It wasn't a formal class action. It was brought by the FCA sort of in a representative capacity on behalf of insureds. So in that sense, those points have been tested. But I think we'll just have to wait to see how things shake down, because I'd hope and expect some insurers to pay out. But yes, if they are refusing and you've got a band of people with the same policy, similar policy wording, then yes, looking at some sort of collective action, relying on those Supreme Court decision, the principles in the Supreme Court decision, may be a more sort of cost-effective and more powerful approach. But I hope we don't get there. I mean, I hope that the insurers do pay out where they are obliged to pay out. Of course, it's difficult for them because this sort of cover was never really intended to cover the sort of scenario that we face with COVID. A BII policy was always tied to your property, and it was supposed to cover you for business-related interruption where, for example, your warehouse was destroyed by a fire, and while it was being reinstated, you got some loss. You got to pay out for some of the losses you suffered. Sometimes there was this disease clause thrown in, which said, if there was a disease outbreak within 25 miles of your premises, we'll pay out. But it was never intended to cover the sort of pandemic that we're dealing with now. But the contract it's a contract, so you have to look at the wording, and the courts have sided with the insureds on this. But it'll be a fight.
Yeah.
It'll be a fight.
With due respect to Bevan Brittan, indeed, all legal companies, there will be people watching this thinking, it's going to cost me. It's going to cost me to get that advice, and I've no idea if I'm going to get benefit of some payout from these massive behemoths of insurance companies. How would you reassure someone right now in a small business that's been ravaged through this time, who's thinking, God, I'm going to have to step up and pay money to get this advice? How do you get over that hurdle?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that is actually what the insurers are, I'm sure, banking on. They're hoping that lots of small businesses just won't bother fighting it because they have to pay lawyers. But there is recourse, and there is other options. You could make a complaint to the ombudsman, and that's obviously a very quick and cost-effective way of getting the ombudsman on your side, and the insurer would then have to look more closely at the decision that they'd made in relation to your policy. So there are other routes to going down, or of course there's sorts of alternative dispute resolution options, including mediation, some without prejudice meetings, and that with some support from lawyers perhaps, but without incurring too many legal fees on that front.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, I'm not seeking in any way to deprive you of fees. It's a profound professional legal service, but it may be an inhibition. But it sounds to me as though the response is anyone who thinks thinks they've got a claim, they really do need legal support. There are other routes, but the thought of a small company going through an ombudsman, there'll be many who think, well, God, that sounds even worse. I don't know how to do that.
It's not the most fun.
Go to a friendly face, Bevan Brittan, and figure out the best way to go ahead. Let's, we're coming towards the end of this. I just want to pick up one point about property. It's not your absolute deep specific area of expertise, but for each of you, are you aware of more property issues when you've got effectively voided offices where people, tenants have not been able to use their offices? Is that an area of problems of needing disputes to be resolved?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of disputes where clients have taken on serviced office space, and obviously they're not using it because they can't have their staff, and there might be a small number of staff, but they can't have their staff in a very small space like that. So they're just paying for something that they're not getting any benefit from at all. But there are other provisions in the contract, unfortunately, that the service provider is providing ancillary services relating to the space. And so there's no way to, in that case, there was no way to engage the force majeure provisions or terminate. So they are in an unfortunate position that they're paying out for something they're not getting any benefit for at all. And that will be happening. It does seem very unfair, but without negotiating another way out of it, then some people are going to be stuck with paying fees for property that they can't use until at least there's a break provision in there.
Well, let's do sort of looking forwards, looking back as we come to the last couple of questions. You each really, if you were thinking back about if you're advising new businesses in any of your areas of expertise, how would your advice be different now than it would have been in those pre-lapsarian days of January, February 2020? What's changed?
I think being prepared, I think that's what I think this is the whole year's taught people that you need to be prepared for all eventualities. And so you need to, when you're doing your forward planning, you need to think about the things what can happen to disrupt what you do. And this year's been the pandemic's been disruptive. The Brexit's been disruptive, and it's just businesses that are able to be flexible are the ones what will be, the ones what are more resilient, the ones that are flexible.
Yeah, Julian, from an employment point of view, other than all the specific areas we've talked about.
I think it's in many ways it's the same thing. It's the flexibility thing. So you would, in terms of new starters and expectations, have written into policies and contracts, rather than what's in there at the moment is that your place of work is going to be X. It will be we have the right to mandate that you work from home as much as we want to. And the other thing is, which I think is coming forward, and this is specifically about working from home, which, as we know, was going that way, but it's just accelerating. Appreciate not in hospitality as such, is to put some of the onus on the sort of employee to look after their health and safety. And I think there is going to be a little bit move towards that. So an employer has to make it clear that although they have an overriding duty, whether someone's at work or at home, to look after their health and safety, where they are at home, they can insist, if you like, that certain measures are put in place as to, for example, the equipment individuals use when they sit at their desk, et cetera, in order to stave off any claims in the future.
In happier times, I'm sure many of your clients at Bevan Brittan often thrive on boldness. Are you finding a greater conservatism, or is there actually yet more space and more need for innovation and boldness? What are your clients saying to you?
I think that this year has shown that people are being really innovative, because there's lots of businesses which have just changed what they're doing. One of my colleagues in Leeds has worked with a manufacturer who's done very well out of manufacturing PPE and think big things. So, and that's a year ago, they were, this time last year, they weren't even, that even wasn't even part of their business. So I think and lots of tech solutions to everyday things we did manually has definitely happened. So I think, I don't know, out of chaos comes creativity, and you definitely see that in the business world.
Out of chaos comes creativity, and all of us are forced to look again at our businesses, why we do what we do and how we do it. And I'd like to ask you to close on one last observation for you each, really. If you could give one piece of advice to those watching this about their approach to legal matters, what would it be? I don't think I've ever known a trio of lawyers to be silent.
Well, I know. I think in terms of approach to legal matters, I think it is. I'm not saying from us, but I think it is on the difficult issues. Just take some preliminary advice, and you'll save yourself a lot of cash down the line, basically.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because I do disputes work, so we often see issues that have been going on for many months, and if we'd have been involved slightly earlier, even with that just bit of preliminary advice, and then let the client do things themselves after that, it would have been an awful lot better.
Your final thoughts and a single piece of advice from a legal perspective to Bristol businesses.
Yeah, get your documentation. I mean, when we're looking to sell a business, usually the things what affects the ability to get a good price is not having everything in place. So, do your documentation early and have it all in place so that you're not scrubbing around afterwards trying to, I don't know, reverse engineer what you should have had in place from the beginning.
Yeah. Good advice, good comments, and thank you very much to our speakers today, from Bevan Brittan to Marty, to Julian and to Wes. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for everyone watching at this live, but also on YouTube subsequently. Thank you very much. Please do look out. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Bye.
Please do look out for our business surgeries with Data Sharp on April 14th, and also with Close Brothers Property Finance. And then also we'll give full details shortly on our special Crumbs Takeaway Hospitality Conference on April 19th. Thank you for all your support for Bristol Life, editorially and commercially. And really, really, really good luck to you all. Good luck to all of us in the coming months. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the latest Bristol Life Business Surgery. Bristol together, always.